Hi, and welcome to Cooking the Books with Heather. Today, we are making the homegrown tomato pie out of the Poole's Diner cookbook. Hopefully by now you have seen the roasted and fresh tomato pie that we did out of the Deep Run Roots cookbook, but now we're gonna make the homegrown tomato pie out of this. I have made it before, but it's been a while. And I wanna say a couple things about the recipe. The recipe itself is for 2 pies. I'm going to have it because we don't need 2 tomato pies today. So luckily, a half is 1 egg because the whole recipe is 2 eggs. So I didn't have to worry about having an egg. And also it calls for buttermilk cheddar. I have never seen such and really didn't feel like trying to look for it and call around. Didn't have time this week. But she says extra sharp cheddar is a suitable substitute, and so that's what we're using today. I think we're using some Vermont sharp cheddar, white cheddar. And also the pie shells are supposed to be pre-baked and cooled. I'm baking our pie shell right now, and this is from the Poole's pie crust recipe that we used for the buttermilk chess pie. Recently we had 3 left over from that, so we're using 1 for this recipe. If you want to see me roll out a pie crust and blind bake it, you can go look at that recipe. So I think that's it. Our first step for this recipe, other than the pie crust that we've already started, is to peel tomatoes. So we're gonna get set up over by the stove and we'll see you in a minute. Okay, so for peeling your tomatoes, she wants you to blanch them just like we did peaches. So you just slice a little X in the bottom here and then drop it in the boiling water, and it takes 60 to 90 seconds. You can kind of see it start to peel away from that X mark when it's done. I have, I think, 3 different kinds of tomatoes here, but it'll be fine. It's what I had on hand and it was just enough, so it's perfect. I also have an ice bath here, so since these weren't in the refrigerator, like my peaches usually are when I peel them this way, I will be putting these in the ice bath when they come out of the boiling water. And I'm not gonna really time this. I have a timer going already. I can kind of look at it and see, but yeah, you can kind of tell when it's ready. In fact, it's starting to split a little bit around the edges, so it might be just about ready anyway. And just like peaches, the riper it is, the more ready it is, the less time it will take to be ready to peel. I think we are just about there. Okay, yeah, they're all sort of starting to split. So I'm going to put this in the ice bath. Ooh. And then I'm going to keep doing this with the other 3 tomatoes I have. And then we will peel them and slice them up. And so that's our next step. See you in a minute. Our tomatoes have been blanched for peeling and been in the ice bath. So now all we have to do is peel them and slice them up. And I'm gonna peel this one. You see how easily the peel just sort of comes off of here. And that's good there. I use a serrated knife generally to peel or to cut tomatoes. They're very slippery, very slippery. All right, so I'm supposed to cut these into 1/4 inch slices. And lay them out on this sheet pan. And so I'm going to do that with all of these tomatoes. And when we're done, I'm gonna cut this core out a little bit. That'll just be kind of yucky. When we're done, we'll be back. Done slicing the tomatoes. They were very slippery, I have to say that. And what I'm supposed to do now is generously salt both sides of these. She says about double what you would normally put on if you were putting it on your sandwich. If you don't have tomato sandwiches in the summer when they're fresh, you really should. And you have to salt your tomatoes for that. So I'm going to generously salt these on this side and then turn them over and salt the other side. The salt will draw out a lot of moisture, and we're gonna get rid of that in a little bit, and I'll show you how when it's time for that. We need to let these sit though for 20 minutes for that to start happening, and we'll be back then. So other than tomatoes, this pie has basically a custard filling that sort of holds everything together. And that's what we make now while we wait for our tomatoes to pull out some water and wait for our crust to cool. I'm gonna go ahead and make the custard. So we need 1 egg, because I'm having the recipe, like I said, and whisk that up. There's no salt or pepper in the custard. The tomatoes will be nicely salted. There's cheese in it that's salty, so there's gonna be plenty of salt, and we put pepper in as we build the pie. I've got some mustard, some Dijon mustard, and some horseradish here. That goes in. Okay. And I've made a mess. We have some heavy cream and some milk. I use full fat milk. And then the rest of this is the basic cider mayo from her book. We've done her mayo on camera before in a video, so I will link to that below. However, I do highly suggest you use an immersion blender instead of the big food processor if you have one. Super easy. And that's what I did today to make this. So, there we go. Oh, I'm also supposed to put in, so the recipe calls for either thyme or basil. It's getting toward the end of basil season here, so I have plenty of that. And go ahead and add this into your custard, and you just tear it small. So I'm gonna do that and mix it in. And our custard will be ready for us when the tomatoes and the crust are ready to build the pie. So we'll be back when that's all ready. Our tomatoes have been sitting for probably about half an hour to 40 minutes. And our next step is to spin out all of the juice that the salt has pulled from the tomatoes using a salad spinner. She says to do this in about 3 batches, but we're doing half, so it'll probably take us maybe twice. I'm just gonna kinda put these in here, not overlapping so much. They can go up the sides a little bit and try to get about half of them in here, and I'll probably do 2 batches anyway. So, get these in here, and yeah, that's probably a little more than half. And we're going to get this on and spin it. They're not super dry, but I don't think you're gonna be able to get them really dry. Now I'm going to just lay these out on a plate so they'll be ready for the next step. And I'm gonna do the other batch, and then we get to put the whole thing together. I was kind of curious how much liquid came off, and from my tray and from in the spinner, it looks like we got about half a cup. She says she saves this and makes like a tomato vinaigrette. I'm not sure if we will or not, but I'm gonna gather all my ingredients and we're gonna put this together. So these are all the ingredients that we're going to layer into this pie crust, and it seems like an awful lot. She says that it will all fit. You might have to have a little faith and build it up kind of high, but it will cook down a little bit. But I'm gonna cook mine on a sheet pan because I don't trust that it won't overflow a little bit in the oven. So we start with a little bit of the cheese to kind of make a barrier on the crust. I did blind bake this a little bit extra because the first time we did it, the bottom was pretty underdone. So we do cheese and then a layer of tomatoes, which she says should slightly overlap. So we're gonna try it that way. And I'm gonna use some of these little pieces in the middle that kind of fell apart. Fill in my holes. All right, that should be good. And then we put on, I think, cheese. Nope. Yeah, another layer of cheese, and then, nope, pepper. Pepper first. Sorry about that. Pepper. Another layer of cheese. She says she gets about 3 layers of tomatoes, so I'm gonna try to do, you know, about, keep enough for 2 more layers. And now we pour just enough of this to sort of get through those ingredients. So about 1/3, all just by eye. Yeah. And then layer it up again. All right. Now this goes into a 350-degree convection oven for 30 minutes, and then you're supposed to sort of rotate it. Well, usually it's 2 pies, so one on top and one on the bottom, and then rotate those. I'll check it at 30 minutes, see if I need to turn it back and forth, back to front, just because, see if my oven is not that even, and we'll come back when it's all done baking. So this is what it looks like when it comes out of the oven. It's been exactly an hour. I think it's perfect. The cheese should be all brown and delicious, and it's bubbly around the edges. And the sad part is we have to wait at least an hour to cut it and eat it. So we'll be doing that. On this episode of Cooking the Books with Heather, we made the homegrown tomato pie from the Poole's Diner cookbook. And I've had this before, but not recently enough to compare it with the recipe from Deep Run Roots that we made very recently. So it was a good idea. We already made pie crust, so go ahead and try this pie and see if we can compare. And that is a new thing here on Cooking the Books with Heather. This is the only time we've made something that really is close enough to something we've already made that we can compare 2 versions. So I think compared to the Deep Run Roots version, this was maybe slightly easier. All we had to do was salt the tomatoes, but we did have to peel these. So peeling them was an extra step, but we treated all of them the same and just salted them and drained them, which you did have to do with half of the ones in the Deep Run Roots cookbook. So I think as far as ease goes, that's, you know, pretty comparable. But then Deep Run Roots has an extra step of roasting half of your tomatoes. So that's you know, one thing. But as far as flavor, I think we actually did prefer the Deep Run Roots pie because of the roasted tomatoes, because there was a little bit more sweetness to those tomatoes. There is a little bit of sugar in her recipe, but really not a lot. It's like a teaspoon of tomatoes in a teaspoon of sugar in the tomatoes. So not a whole lot, but it was noticeable. It was noticeable that it was sweeter than this recipe. This did require a little extra effort, as did the one in Deep Run Roots. So I'd say maybe slight edge to this recipe as far as effort. But both were really good. So if you prefer a sweeter pie, go with Deep Run Roots. If you prefer a more savory pie, the one here in the Poole Steiner cookbook is probably the one for you. Other than that, relatively similar, both really delicious. So if you've enjoyed this recipe, if you enjoyed watching me cook, please hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and come back next week and see what we make next.